Hello and welcome to another episode of Constructing Tomorrow. In this episode, we have Collin Creach, an experienced senior account executive with Outbuild, which is a construction scheduling and planning software. He started his construction tech journey working as a project solutions engineer at Barton Malow and moved on to working in big ConTech companies such as Bluebeam and Procore for 7 years as an account executive and sales leader. In our conversation, we discuss about construction tech startups, how did Bluebeam and Procore succeed, importance of integrations of point solutions to an enterprise platform, issues faced in the world of construction technology and scheduling, and how to optimize scheduling and planning on construction projects. With that said, I bring you Collin Creach. Hi, Collin. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Sid. Thanks for having me, man.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm super excited for our conversation and to learn more about the world of construction scheduling and what you guys are doing at Outbuild. But before we dive right into it, let's talk about you and your journey. So you had your background in BBA, and now you're working at a construction technology startup. How did this
Yeah,
switch come along?
yeah, yeah. It's a good question. Yeah, I guess first and foremost too, I'm a good example that you don't necessarily have to get construction management degree or engineering degree to get in here. Yeah, so I think some of it is really attached to kind of my family. I'm kind of a second generation construction family. My dad was had a career in healthcare construction. He kind of had a come up of a carpenter laborer turned foreman turned project manager and so forth. And so he's retired now, and he ended up, having a pretty good career in that. And so construction has kind of been, conversations at the dinner table, and even like my upbringing, we've moved from Tennessee, a couple different spots growing up, to then Florida. And so kind of that kind of traveling family thing has just been something that's part of growing up and knowing that that's around. And my brother ended up getting an Auburn degree, a building science degree out of Auburn too. So for myself, I'd actually been a little bit more like after the arts. I had played a little bit of baseball growing up, but then like through high school and middle school, I picked up a guitar and started kind of learning guitar, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Like this is for me for sure. And I ended up thinking that I wanted to go to school for like majoring in music actually. And so I had like a music theory class in high school, and when I applied for the music major, they're like, if you can't read sheet music, I'm sorry, but like you can't really. And okay, well, can't do that. So I kind of pivoted from that, from like my concentration to just be like, all right, well, I also really like tech. Like my brother and I have an older brother. He's 4 years older. We used to build computers to like have tricked out gaming PCs, and so
Mhm.
I was like, I had the kind of the slightest idea that I think I want to work in tech in general. So maybe like a business degree would be broad enough for that. So that was kind of the idea. And then in college, my last year, when I was just before graduating, I had my senior year, had the opportunity to work for Apple. And so the Apple retail store, I mean, it still is like this, but at the time, I mean, it was just craziness. Every day was madness with people walking in, and my job was to kind of be somewhat in sales, but kind of be consultative and just kind of show them the newest Apple products. It's also the year that Steve Jobs passed, which is kind of a
Oh,
to be there. And yeah, it's just for that to have that, I think was kind of an opening for me to be like, yes, I definitely want to work in tech, and then even maybe like sales, but could be really interesting for me. So fast forward to when I graduated, my dad was like, hey, like you don't have to do this, but like the company I'm with opened up a role for kind of a IT support type of role, and I was like, okay, like tell me more. And it was just kind of like, well, you don't have to work weekends because it's not retail, so that's a plus. It pays a
mhm.
little better. And then I'm like, I do like construction, so I guess let's try that, and let's jump into that opportunity. So I think just weighing my options, it was just kind of like, this is a job right out of college, like this could be really interesting.
Was
Um,
that a GC?
yeah, and so it was at a GC Barton Malow company, and so the role was to kind of help kind of liaison the IT support efforts that were coming from the Michigan office where they were headquartered in the Florida Orlando office. So it was kind of like they had some computers, they were growing fast down there, they had a lot of support needed, and it was just like it wasn't really working to not have someone functionally like right there to be able to troubleshoot issues or like even set up computers. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my first way into construction.
So, like a great summary of like how you got into construction, right? Like not having a degree, but as you mentioned, you don't necessarily need a degree to be in construction. You can there's
Yeah,
still
just kind
so
of fought my
many
way.
yeah, there's still so many departments out there that you could contribute to. So I think that was kind of your introduction to construction technology in a sense, right? And
Yeah,
then you also worked for probably 7 years at Bluebeam.
yeah.
So I wanted to know, firstly, how did you get to know about Bluebeam? Was it during your GC days? And then I also wanted to talk to you about when you joined Bluebeam. Was it like a big company? Because right now it's like it's a big name, right? But when
Yeah.
you joined in, how was Bluebeam back then? And when you left Bluebeam, like just walk us through the journey.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, man. So Barton Malow was kind of short-lived, I guess, in overall career, but it was 3 years. And so as I was kind of supporting folks, I was basically like working with PCs a lot to install the various construction tech tools, right? And then I had the opportunity at Barton Malow to work on kind of one of their premier projects at the time, the Daytona International Speedway. It's $400 million exterior renovation, had a whole bunch of exterior steel that they were adding to increase the seat capacity. It was had some challenging schedule requirements, right? Because they had to keep races going, but then continue construction while the races would go. So it'd be like pause everything, keep the job site safe. So it was like a challenging thing all around. And a guy that's still a great mentor to me, Jason McFadden, had kind of entrusted in me to be like the support person for the whole project. And so I went there every week. I'd hand new computers and iPads to the superintendents and the field team at Barton Malow and Daytona Speedway. And I was just like, this is awesome. And I love all the tech that they're using because it was kind of had the press behind it. Right. And so, I mean, instead you have to realize too, this is 2015, man. So like back then, uh, maybe even 2014 when we first started, or 2013. But the whole point is that paperless projects were not quite there yet. Like they were not. Every single thing had Bluebeam. It was kind of like Bluebeam is kind of this kind of newer coming thing. We're also going to use TechLabM site as our model viewer. We're going to use P6 for scheduling. We're going to use they had an in-house project management system called Prolog, but that they could kind of customize for the owner. So it was just a lot of technology. They even put smart boards inside of slanted plan tables that was kind of like a touch screen to mirror the same functionality of like a full size drawing that people like to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
that let them kind of have these really, collaborative like planning meetings or like looking at the latest drawings that came from Rossetti, the architect. Really worked really well with the owner, International Speedway Corporation. So that was the aha moment for me of Bluebeam getting on my radar because that was probably the most used software. Um, they were using the studio sessions for kind of collaborative pay app reviews, all kinds of stuff. Working with the architect on design changes, and the one thing that I like love though was teaching people how to use technology and like using Bluebeam especially. That was one thing that just was always a hitter.
Or were you
So the
involved in
last
like
role that I
training? Sorry, were you
yeah
involved in
so
training as well?
Yeah, exactly. Like my last kind of phase of before I moved on to Bluebeam was as like a project solutions engineer, and we would author training materials like SOPs and best practices on like how to use Bluebeam for setting up your drawings, how to organize Box for setting up your folder structures. It was all kinds of stuff. So that gave me kind of very good knowledge of how to use the product. I became an expert at Bluebeam before going over there. And so, yeah, this position opened up at Bluebeam for they called it a construction account specialist at the time. And they were looking for people that had some construction background and kind of wanted to get into tech, from a sales perspective. And yeah, your question on like, what was the size of Bluebeam at the time? So a little bit of Bluebeam history. They're about 20 years old, maybe a little bit older. They came out in 2002. They were founded.
Oh
The
wow.
founding of them is actually really interesting. It was NASA JPL engineers were working on iterations of the Mars rover, and they needed to make a CAD plugin to turn it into PDF faster than anything else. They realized the PDF was kind of this fast, lightweight way to be able to convey a new iteration of design change for the Mars rover, try to get it out there. And they just engineered this product of like CAD to PDF. Like that was all the Bluebeam was in the very beginning. And then they started paying attention. Like people seem to like this thing called PDFs. Like people seem to like the way that this is lightweight and can be leveraged for like adding markups to it.
Was
Um,
Adobe not the big one at that time? Weren't they the market leaders?
yeah, I mean, Adobe is pretty much kind of owning, probably even still to the market, like in general, the most PDF commonly used PDF software. But I would say that I think it was like 2001 or something. Something also happened with Adobe is that Adobe no longer owned the PDF format. It became like there's a thing called the International Standardization Organization, and PDF became an ISO standard. So
Oh,
how you're seeing like BIM standards and stuff these days, right? And so Bluebeam latched onto that idea from an early onset. Tasha Reed, who's over at Procore now, Richard Lee, the original CEO, and then Don Jacob, another co-founder that came from NASA JPL. They kind of worked together in those early days to build, this markup tool kind of monster that it is now, which is awesome. And then they got acquired in 2014, just the year before I came over to them. So they got acquired by a company called Nemetschek, and they're kind of like the best way I describe them is like they're like the Autodesk of Europe. Like you go to
oh,
Europe, and a lot of the technology there, ArchiCAD, Graphisoft. There's a bunch of brands that Nemetschek owns that they're well known in Europe. And so Bluebeam was acquired in 2014 for a pretty substantial amount, and the whole kind of thing with Nemetschek, and people were asking me like, hey, do you think they're going to be any different? And really they weren't. Like functionally, as a holding company or as an acquisition partner, they found success by building a portfolio of brands and just letting them do their thing, right? Like we just will become kind of the ownership or like the holdings, and let you continue to kind of flourish and grow the customer base. And so, yeah, they were probably a little over 200 employees when I started, and then when I left, there were at least 500, maybe more,
oh
and
wow.
probably by now 600 or 700. So it was a lot of growth in those 7 years. It was probably wearing most hats that I think that someone's tech journey could have. From a initially it was kind of like making phone calls, just trying to get meetings. That they call those SDRs now, right? Software or like a sales development representative or business
Yeah,
development representative, and it's a funny thing about construction is cold calls tend to work. They can tend to be a way to get some attention because everybody's email is just completely overloaded with a bunch of notifications and stuff. And so, when their phone rings, they pick up. And so I learned early on from there, just like, this was a kind of a fun, fast, dynamic group to work with at Bluebeam. Um, Great culture, great concept of like work-life balance. And I became remote. I moved from Chicago at their office. I initially moved for Bluebeam. I lived there for a year in Chicago downtown, and then I became remote. And this was 2016, so pre-COVID and all this stuff. And there was definitely hesitation. Like, are
yeah,
you sure you can do your job from home? I was like, yeah, I mean, I definitely can. And I wanted to be
yeah,
close to where customers were, and so yeah, that was
yeah.
kind of the goal. That's how I got to Bluebeam and what I did over there.
Interesting story about how it started. Like I didn't know like that was how it originated, and then also the
Yeah,
acquisition part because I didn't know they were like acquired by different firms. Interesting
yeah,
insights on that. And you
yeah,
mentioned that a lot of your work was also making sure like you grow the company, right? Um,
yeah.
my question is, as at like working in a construction tech startup, how do you get consumers or companies to buy into the product? Because there's a lot of solutions
Yeah,
out there, right? So
sure.
how do you kind of say that, oh hey, this is the go-to solution for you?
Yeah, man, it's easier said than done, and it's kind of a crowded market right now. I think with solutions, right? There's kind of this guy I was Rob Sawyer with Cast Construction, and I saw he had a comment that I was engaging in the thread on, and he said we've gone from like app fatigue to like app salesman fatigue, where they're just if you're like a decision maker at a construction company, you're just inundated with people that reach out, and so I think it's really starting with pain, right? And kind of trying to find out where you can come in and solve the pain. I mean, Bluebeam solved the pain because they were a purpose built software tool that came in where Adobe couldn't, right? Adobe is a massive company that services more than just the construction industry. They
Right.
have kind of dabbled with like what markup tools should we make that would basically service everybody. And Bluebeam thought, you know what, this is our niche. Like, let's actually make it to where we make a markup tool that kind of services like purpose built for that. So I think, I've made this thought before of like a point solution should kind of have different points, right? Like a ballpoint pen versus a marker, because there's, depending on who you are, there's different needs, right? But I think where Outbuild comes in, I guess where what I like about Outbuild is that it's kind of got, it marries those different types of point solutions in the same way that Bluebeam was too. Like you can be an engineer, you can be an architect, you can be an owner, you can be a general contractor in a trade, and benefit from Bluebeam or Outbuild. It's the same kind of concept because it's something that a lot of people are touching, right? A lot of people are getting access to drawings. A lot of people are getting access to the schedule. So I make these comparisons a lot because, and I think it matters, right? With someone that, a company that became so successful, obviously knew that, right? And I think it was a lot of observation, pain out there. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe we can get into Outbuild a little bit because I think I've been doing this at this point 12 years, and I think I've come to learn that if you think of like the life cycle of a construction project, right, there are solutions that pretty much touch every part of that life cycle. You've got your pre-construction kind of boom that's happening. I think even still, right, there's a lot of solutions that are helping trying to aid in that effort. Whether it's estimating or kind of helping with design, and like newer SaaS tools that are helping like better access to the model, and like things like CM Builder for like logistics. And then there's
sorry to cut you down there, but what does the life cycle of a startup look like?
Yeah, so I mean, they typically have different rounds of funding, right? So if you're going to go the VC route, which is using venture capitalists and sometimes like institutional investors and private equity, a lot of different ways you can kind of go and seek money. But in Outbuild's case, it was a incubation group that helped initially fund the idea with it. And then Franco, our CEO, he actually went in kind of Latin American market and just drove around trying to seek that pain, right? And like was wondering what's out there that is necessary for us to build that hasn't already been built in construction. And where he kind of kept coming up was just, it's the scheduling thing. We're doing this like look ahead stuff that's not reconciling with it. Our projects are always behind. So that kind of gave him the initial idea for it. But yeah, broadly speaking, startups can have Series A all the way through technically Series like X. They don't ever usually go that far. They can have the just different routes that kind of help them in those next phases of growth.
How much they want to die.
Yeah, exactly. And like, divert the equity, I think it would be that typically in SaaS world too, it's ARR, right? You don't really want to get to Series A until you're starting to kind of prove that you're well over past $1 million ARR and things like that. ARR is annual recurring revenue. And so that kind of catches investor attention, right? To just say like, we have found a product market fit. We feel like we are now at the next stage where we can hire more people. We want to get some more engineers because now that we found a place in the market, we feel like we can now expand and grow and also kind of service our customers better. It's kind of all the above. So when you go that route as kind of a startup, it's not all of them make it, right? It takes kind of a grind of like a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats in kind of a smaller team until you kind of get to that next round or that next phase of growth. And we haven't even talked about my time at Procore yet, but I've gone from like a just post acquired company to then a public company at Procore, and then now at kind of a early stage startup, I would call it.
Yeah, I wanted to actually talk about Procore. So after your stint at Bluebeam, and then you joined Procore for a little time. If you want to draw parallels on differences between these two companies, just in terms of not what they offer, but how they function, what would that be? Because Procore is fairly old and Bluebeam is what I would assume. If you can draw some parallels there.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'd always kind of, like looking over the proverbial fence when I was at Bluebeam, just kind of wondered how things are, what it'd be like to be working for like a full platform versus a solution that kind of services a need. And so for me, that felt like just a greater challenge and a greater calling. I think I thought that like, if I were to explore kind of continuing in my career path, it'd be exciting to be able to be like, I want to bring like full on general contractors, like really small or really big or whatever, onto this kind of new way of doing things, which is just like entirely managing a project using a platform instead of it being kind of the older way that we used to manage projects, was just, actual books, actual paper, phone calls, emails, all that stuff. Procore actually does have a similar age as Bluebeam. But it took a different approach, right? Procore is an all-encompassing kind of project management software, and then they also understood from an early onset that we need to be, for us to become like number one, we need to have like a very kind of aggressive acquisition strategy and integration strategy. So they've acquired companies along the way that had really good solutions that would just fit into the fold very nicely with what they were trying to do. So I think they had a company called Submittal Builder that used to be a startup and used to be a separate solution that just works with Procore submittals to be able to generate a submittal log. And before Bluebeam, even PlanGrid had kind of this concept of upload your drawings and we'll automatically label all this stuff for you. Like,
right.
PlanGrid, Procore ended up ultimately tying that type of technology in. So their strategy was to kind of like very ecosystem based and have like, good integrations where they fall short or they don't have it in their own kind of menu, if you will. And so that just like the grandness of that, I think excited me. Just like the sheer like world that opens up by going to a whole platform was exciting. And then I think, my reason for departure was really just to kind of, again, looking at like, I want to also contribute to something that just doesn't have that much help in, right? Like something like scheduling, because has been a lot of observation of like there just being, this kind of disconnection that is occurring. And I'd love to hear your thoughts too, just in your observation of it. But I think like, Outbuild, when I was at Procore, I was leading a team, and I remember people would sometimes ask us like, how does Procore handle scheduling? And I was like, well, we can't really natively do it in Procore, and it would support P6 and Outbuild had been called ProPlanner at the time, but somehow it got on our radar that, hey, there's this other cloud-based solution that's kind of starting to gain steam. Like maybe you guys, as in like, Procore's leadership, they're like, maybe you guys can talk to ProPlanner guys and like do a deal together, right? Like maybe if they really need, something, they're building it inside of ProPlanner / what would become Outbuild, integrates nicely. It's a little bit better than just uploading a file and so forth. And so it got my radar while I was at Procore. Yeah. And so I thought that it looked, and this is of the utmost compliment, it looked like Procore had built Outbuild. Like it looked like it was engineered by really good engineering software teams. So that's what caught my attention to want to come over.
Yeah, I want to get back to the integrations with Procore and how it helps. But before that, quickly, let's talk about Outbuild. If you have to explain Outbuild in one sentence, what would that be?
Yeah, the one sentence is that it's a construction scheduling and look ahead planning software. So it marries the kind of the traditional milestone based schedule with also those short interval term planning, and kind of makes it so that it services both ends, right? The field and the office. Is more than just kind of a gimmick to say that it connects the office to the field. It does, because people that from a pre-con perspective are working on the schedule or that are in the office can then have that translate into that look ahead, and they can see that and build tasks based on that, and also inform back to the office if there's changes that are needed.
So which are some of the softwares in the market right now in terms of scheduling? We know about the Microsoft project, Primavera P6, we have Outbuild. Are there any other scheduling softwares out there?
Yeah, there's quite a few in the world of, I would say, like most often we see them separated in those two kind of buckets. It's just scheduling or planning. And so in scheduling, you have things called like Asta Power Project, you have Phoenix. There's, like you said, the traditional Microsoft project, which is primarily our focus right now is that. And then P6, which is probably, the most commonly encountered one, but also one where we find that it's not getting as much traction in the field, right? It's not being leveraged from the planners, the people that are actually building the buildings. And so that's on the scheduling front. And then on the planning front, there's tools out there like TouchPlan. I've heard of things like Neali and some other like whiteboard type of sticky note type of solutions that would aid in the effort for like a pull plan. But again, are kind of firmly suited in that planning piece. They don't have a way that kind of has a conversion back to the schedule or communicating things back to the schedule. And so where we really feel like we're doing a unified approach is to be able to have the two always working in sync with one another.
So you mentioned a couple of words there, schedule and plan. So give me a difference between scheduling and planning.
Yeah, I think of it like just durations, right? A major milestone schedule can consist of different ways or thought process or ideologies. You can use CPM, you can use whatever it is, but typically, the schedules on the master level schedule are larger durations, like 20 days or higher. Maybe even less. But in general, when it comes to the look ahead items, and Outbuild kind of ultimately has a best practice where it comes to recommendations is like look ahead stuff should be 5 days or less, master schedule stuff should be 5 days or greater, and you kind of find that sweet spot of what it's kind of like taking apart a Lego set and then looking at the instruction booklet, right? I think like if you're in a room with people and you've taken apart the Lego set, or you're just trying to think, how do we build this Lego set? When you run a planning meeting, you need all the trades involved to be able to actually kind of give you the order of the instructions for the Lego set, right? And so I think maybe the schedule is the box, the Lego that shows the building, right? You can kind of gather ideas on how it could be made just by looking at some of those kind of like broader sections, or just seeing the end state, right? Like when's the start date and when's the end date. But then the planning is really where the action happens. That's where stuff is dynamic. That's where things are changing order. That's where issues are coming up. That's where the building is taking place. So I think it serves a really good purpose. It makes a lot of sense, I think, to have scheduling and planning. And so we often have to really drill that down, right? It's just being like, okay, yeah, like this may on the schedule part may not have like the resource loaded stuff that you're used to with T6, but like people love it in the field, right? And the planning is where the work gets done. Like, Todd Zabela's book called Build to Fail, it really talks about like for too long, we've just allowed the industry to come to a place of the separation of planning and doing, right? And that's like one of the cruxes of the issue and what really Outbuild's kind of after from our software solution standpoint. There's other things we can be doing, right? Better production tracking and better things with even materials, and we can't necessarily solve the labor shortage, with a software solution. But in general, one of those things is that it's kind of become a indoctrination to allow companies to get so big that they have fully separated the scheduling aspect with the people that are building.
Talking about issues, I would not say issues. I'll say areas where you could improve. In the construction scheduling world, what are top two areas where you see an improvement can be done from the existing?
So, I mean, I always think, you look at the problem, right? And what is the problem? It's that like schedules are not hitting their mark. Very often, I think it's like 80% or something. The statistics are basically saying that the way that we're conducting scheduling these days is that we're either overshooting, we're not encountering issues before they occur, we're not addressing the issues that have occurred in the field fast enough back on the schedule. And so where Outbuild is looking to come in is to bring the people that should be actually involved in discussions, right? And I have this I'm lucky to have been able to tell this story because I think, I'm not a product manager, right? But I sat with a product manager and I asked him, like, how are you doing this, right? What makes sense for Outbuild? Like, why did you guys go with this solution? And he was like, it's because I can actually effectively run my planning meetings, right? When it came to the actual look ahead, I didn't have to look at this Excel-based spreadsheet that my superintendent made, that was kind of an afterthought, and that, you hope that he didn't miss something, and reconcile it back with the schedule. The other part is that trade partners don't want to just look at your schedule. There's no answer in it for them. Like, there's no need for them to be looking at an Excel-based spreadsheet of you kind of trying to fit things in a box. People naturally don't gravitate to stuff that doesn't service them, right? And so I think like our thought with our look ahead, the way that it shows like the actual sequencing of the work and what days you're going to be working and who's in the order of what, they're like, this is awesome because now I don't have to make a bunch of phone calls to figure that out, or I can make this commitment to be here on this day, or I can also just have a voice and be like, hey, GC, like the way that you guys thought about this is not great, right? Like as a plumber, I need to be able to do this instead. Like I need to be able to, because we're not, as GCs, we're not experts in the actual installation of, piping or rebar. We rely on our trade partners for that. So naturally, you want to be able to get that input from them. And uh, where we really found, I think, success is to be able to have an easy enough thing to look at, right, during a planning meeting that just serves that need, right? It's just a database decision, or it's a database visualization tool, if you want to look at it that way. And people actually get bought into that idea because they know that, okay, like this has helped me. This is like I'm able to communicate. I can make a roadblock and say, I can't do this unless you help me out here, unless you remove this material, or unless you make sure that this shop drawing is approved, because I don't know what the heck I'm looking at in the field. I need to be able to get this detail resolved so that I can actually get on with what I'm supposed to be scheduled to be doing, right? So that's the whole idea.
Yeah, I think you touched upon a lot of these issues or areas of improvement. So from my perspective, right, where I think, and you mentioned a lot about communication, and the transparency of it. So from my perspective, what I see is there isn't really a good communication between, say, the project management team and the field management team, or with the trade partners, right? There's a lack of inputs from the trade partners at certain point in terms of updating the schedule. I would say there's some issues with also resource availability, especially with like
Yeah.
something like a crane, on which trade needs to use crane and how that impacts the progress, right? And I feel like these issues which never get into the schedule, or it just never the schedule never shows or reflects the impacts because of this. There's also instances where if there's a design change or something, does that get updated in the schedule as frequently as we would like to, right? So how is Outbuild kind of helping to tackle these common issues of um, just, I would say, just in time information, if you will?
Yeah. No, great questions too. And sorry, I think the audio caught out a little bit, but I got most of it. So solving for some of the just-in-time issues, I think, is important. The way that we've observed look aheads is that the more that you kind of try to plan out in the future, the more that you're wrong, right? So I think like we kind of want to make the approach of like, okay, like leverage a just-in-time approach to be able to say 1 to 3 weeks out, you should probably know what you're gonna be doing. You should know who's going to be on the site and when, how many guys it's going to take, what are the materials that are required, right? You leverage things like Outbuild's connection to Procore submittals so that you can tie in things like your shop drawing approvals, things like your product data submittals that are going to hang up the job, whether it's 1 month out or 2 months out. You can put those with the schedule activity to be able to say, when it goes red based on the lead time that I entered, but that if it's still not resolved, I can be very proactive and make sure that I kind of light a fire, or maybe I have to tell the owner, if it's the design issue, I need you to kind of help add some pressure to the design team to get this resolved. Otherwise, we're going to run behind. And that is a actual way of conveying that without just like yelling and kind of trying to push people around on stuff, right? So it's kind of a lot of what Outbuild does is to try to kind of give you data to inform you on making good decisions that would help otherwise, or that would otherwise impede you from accomplishing the scheduled task. And then roadblocks, like we talked about, right? It's like if a simple thing of just assigning a roadblock to an inspector to be due on the day that I need them on site, that's powerful, because that inspector's got other jobs I'm sure they have to go to. They don't necessarily know, without digging through their email, or getting a bunch of phone calls, where they need to be and on what day. I mean, they might, but chances are, with the kind of the state of things and not having a good system for that,
Right.
they're kind of blind to it, right? Until it becomes an issue. And so we also try to really, as much as we can, we want to build out tools that help, like, encourage proactivity, because the more proactive we are, the less reactive we are when things go wrong. That, I think, is helping a lot. There are elements too, I think, that we want to help with even just in general, like broadly speaking, is just the quality of construction, right? Like if things are being pushed to go really fast, it's because maybe, we can't get enough people on site that day because of labor shortage or whatever the issue is, right? But I think like we're also trying to have kind of encourage the coolness of construction with things like Outbuild and like the look ahead, and even having things like PPC automatically drawn up on the trade partners, so that our kind of broader vision and what we really think could be impactful is to have like a trade partner and be able to like wear a badge or have a certification that says like, in the Atlanta area we have 15 jobs that we're 80% PPC on, right? And so I think that's an impactful way to say the quality of you as a trade partner. And that means you get more money, you get more profit as a trade partner, right? That also means that might encourage that company to grow and get more people to come out of college and consider construction, because you can make a killing if you're a great trade partner. You can make a lot of profit. So that's a really kind of broad, grand vision, but I also think it's not too far off, right? Like the more that we can make tools out there that encourage young folks to come on board, the more likely we are to kind of help bridge that gap. And so, you look at other tools out there, nobody wants to the state of just technology, right? We're all used to just looking at our phones and kind of getting a quick answer on something. And no one wants to take a technology tool, take 14 hours to learn it, right? It's like, I didn't get out of college to go learn some like crazy super advanced software. Like, and that's even outside of just scheduling, right? Like that could be a number of things, but kind of having like technology that supports just like the coolness aspect of it all. Because I'm sure someone like you said, you're probably able to hop from one tech piece to another in your every day-to-day kind of role, right? So you need to have complementary solutions. You guys are busy people, right? You got stuff to do, you got people to call, you got projects to manage. So it's kind of like having really ease of use is a way that helps aid in that effort for sure.
Yeah, great point. I think, and especially with if you're pushing a new technology in any department of construction, right? It involves a change. So the better UI UX you have, the better ease of use you have. It kind of makes a transition easy, I would say. Especially with Procore integration, I think since everything is on Procore or ACC right now, it just makes it easier in terms of managing a lot of point solutions in just one platform. So I was curious to know, and this is just me, I was just curious to know, with integrations with Procore, so how does that work out? What the deal looks like? Is it like, oh, hey, you provide a fixed fee, and then doesn't matter how many companies or vendors use your software, you still have to pay a fixed fee? Or is it like, oh, you have to pay a small fixed fee and then it's a percentage of profit sharing for each company that registers or number of users that register? How does that deal look like?
Yeah, sure. And there's parts that I don't know all the mechanics of in terms of like rev share and partnership share, and I'm sure there's parts that even if I did, I wouldn't be able to share. But the way it typically works is to kind of have a way that, big tech partners, right, like Autodesk and Procore, to your point, there's a lot out there. I think in the same way that construction tech buyers equate to, is this solving a challenge? Is this reducing pain in the organization? Is this giving us time back? Big companies like that are paying more attention to ones that have a strong yes to answering those questions, right? And then we used a partner called Agave. That's like they're kind of almost an intermediary that has a unified API that makes it to where it can easily get involved with connecting those conversations, making those integration connections happen, like those endpoints and API endpoints. So I think Agave is kind of the logistical way of answering how we've made that happen. And then, I'm sure every vendor maybe has a different arrangement in terms of like sharing and profit sharing and like co-branding and stuff. But I think, we have gained good traction also by being a mutually good partner, right? Like we care a lot about a lot of the same things, right? Like we want to be able to align our brand with things like the mental health crisis and like things like being able to, attend Procore events and, sponsor stuff that's like showing that we're here to support the industry just as much as they are, or they're, as hopefully as big as they are one day. And so I think that's a big standout piece is not everybody quite gets that. Not everybody has that kind of integration from the start mindset as like a startup, as a company like that. But Outbuild certainly does. And, we also want to eventually expand to ACC. I mean, I think that it stands the reason as we get more funding, as we kind of grow more, we want to be able to have integration partners for a myriad of things, right? Maybe one day for CMIC, maybe one day for Red Team, maybe, whatever else, XYZ. Because I think every one of these outside of Procore and Autodesk, they all have solutions that they're trying to do in the world of project management. And we want to be supportive of that. And I think like having that, the way you get out of that app salesman fatigue is to be able to be in the marketplace of the software they already have, right? That's like the actual answer of how to avoid that. So it's a strategic way of getting your foot in the door by already being integrated or being in the menu of these big partners like Procore.
Nice. I have a couple more questions in terms of, so you've worked in a lot of construction tech startups, right? So what would be some pros and cons of working in a construction tech startup?
Pros and cons, man. Well, the con of any, I think, startup is that you don't always, and I've yet to be in this place, but I would say like a startup in general doesn't have the promised future beyond a couple of years of like actual funding runway, as they call it. And so, the con is that sometimes if you kind of feel like things aren't working, that you might feel like you're, the like longer term, like a year or two, that the runway might run out and the company just has to kind of dissolve. But that's like, that's more of just like always the prevailing risk of taking that startup journey, right? It's just being like, high risk, high reward, right? It's gonna have this component of, we hope that we can gain enough traction in enough amount of time to survive, and the best startups do, right? And we like to follow stories of ones like Document Crunch. We feel like we're pretty close to where they are in terms of like, good product market fit, really kind of servicing the same type of folks, good integration partnership. I mean, they just went Series A. We're pretty close to that. And so that's, I guess that flips over to the fun or the pros, is that you get to really have way more say than you do at a large organization in a role like mine. Even if my title is senior account executive, I come up with my own ideas for kind of branding or events or writing articles on LinkedIn. And I won't apologize for how loud I am on it, because I think we have to be loud, right? We have to be willing to kind of stick ourselves out there and just be like, hey, if it gets one more person that like answers an email or wants to have a demo, that's good for business. So, that's an important piece of it. So the pros are that no day is the same, and it's a lot of exciting people and fun to talk to new people every day. I on average run multiple demos per week. And so there's all that many people that I'm getting to talk to and hear their stories and hear their pain. And so that's a lot of fun. I mean, for me, it makes it one of the best parts of the job, is that, I feel like I have the chance to be able to make a little bit of an impact in the industry by giving them something that gives them time back. Because time is money at the end of the day. We all have to be able to get some time back to be able to do what we can in our job. So,
yeah. And before we end our session, what would be one quick advice to every young professional out there?
Yeah. So I read this ahead of time, and I think I'm just going to repeat maybe what I've said before, but construction's cool. I think the more that we can get that out there, and the more that we can kind of show that it's awesome to work in, there's few things that are more satisfying than seeing a construction project that you built or that you were a part of, or you're in the team supporting them, even if it's a small part. Once that's done, you're like, you drive by the product and you're like, that was so cool, right? So I think, the advice for it is that, using my own example, is if you have an interest in it, there's roles for you, right? There's, whether it's in tech, whether it's actual, administration or project management, could be in design, could be in solutions engineering, like implementation type of stuff, like HR, marketing. I mean, there's all kinds of like roles in construction. And so I think the advice is that don't worry if you didn't get a degree in it. You just have to show the interest, and I think where I like to think that I'm predicting or whatever, that my observation is that people are open to that discussion, even if you don't have that kind of background. They're after the passion. Like if you're coming in with passion for it, I think you can convince folks because they want to feed off of that passion. They want to also share that passion with you. Like everybody wants an exciting part of their job, or like wants to enjoy and feel fulfilled. And so, passion and fulfillment leads to like better culture at an organization. So I think if you're passionate about it, or if you want to explore a role in construction, I just say go for it, whether you have a degree in it or not.
Yeah, I completely agree with it. So I feel like, yes, construction is really a great field to be a part of, at least at this time. Great insights, Colin. I appreciate you sharing your journey and everything about Outbuild. Where can people reach out to you and learn about the company?
Yeah, well, I already mentioned that I'm on LinkedIn fairly often. You can message me directly on there, but just go to outbuild.com. You can try it out for free. It's fully functional, lets you get a sense and kind of try your hands on it yourself. Yeah, and hopefully we can talk again soon. I appreciate you having me on, Sid.
Yep. Thank you so much, Colin. Thank you for tuning in to Constructing Tomorrow. I hope this episode provided valuable insights and tips. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a review or a comment. Until next time, keep building and stay curious.